14-year-old Aiden Fucci sat slouched in his chair at the St. Johns County Courthouse on March 24, 2023, wearing an orange jail jumpsuit and leg shackles, seemingly unfazed as Judge R. Lee Smith prepared to sentence him for the brutal stabbing murder of 13-year-old Tristan Bailey, who had been stabbed 114 times in a horrific attack that shocked the nation and devastated the close-knit community of St. John's, Florida. For nearly 2 years since his arrest on Mother's Day 2021, Aiden had maintained a cocky, defiant attitude throughout the legal proceedings, smirking in his mugshot that went viral on social media, making light of the murder in jailhouse phone calls that were recorded and later played in court, and reportedly telling other inmates he expected to serve maybe 5 years in juvenile detention before being released as an adult with his record sealed. Before we continue with this disturbing case, please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support is what allows us to continue bringing these important stories to light. What Aiden Fucci didn't understand, what his casual attitude and complete lack of remorse prevented him from comprehending, was that Florida law allows prosecutors to charge juveniles as adults for first-degree murder, and that the mountain of evidence against him, his own Snapchat videos, security camera footage, DNA evidence, witness statements, and his own contradictory lies to investigators, had sealed his fate long before he ever entered that courtroom. When Judge Smith finally pronounced sentence after hearing devastating victim impact statements from Tristan Bailey's family, Aiden's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of genuine shock and disbelief, as the judge sentenced him to life in prison. Not 5 years in juvie, not a chance at parole when he turned 18, but life imprisonment with a mandatory minimum review after 25 years, meaning Aiden Fucci would be at least 39 years old before he could even be considered for potential release, and more likely would spend the rest of his natural life behind bars for the senseless murder of a 13-year-old cheerleader whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time when Aiden decided he wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. Aiden Sean Fucci was born on November 10, 2006, in Jacksonville, Florida, to Crystal Smith and Jason Fucci, a couple whose relationship was tumultuous and unstable from the beginning. Jason Fucci had a lengthy criminal record including arrests for domestic violence, drug possession, and assault, and he was largely absent from Aiden's life, cycling in and out of jail and rehab facilities throughout Aiden's childhood. Crystal Smith struggled as a single mother, working multiple jobs to support Aiden and dealing with her own personal problems, including substance abuse issues that would later come to light during the investigation into Tristan's murder. Aiden grew up primarily in the St. John's area north of Jacksonville, a rapidly developing suburban community that attracted young families seeking good schools and safe neighborhoods, away from the urban crime and poverty of Jacksonville proper. By all outward appearances, Aiden had a relatively normal childhood in his early years. He attended local schools, played youth sports including football and wrestling, and had neighborhood friends with whom he would ride bikes and play video games. But teachers and coaches who knew Aiden during his elementary and middle school years would later tell investigators that even as a young child, Aiden displayed concerning behavioral traits. He was aggressive toward other children, getting into fights over minor issues. He had difficulty controlling his temper, often exploding in rage when he didn't get his way. He showed limited empathy when other children were hurt or upset, sometimes even laughing at their distress. And he had a troubling fascination with violence, frequently drawing pictures of weapons, gore, and death in his school notebooks. As Aidan entered his teenage years and began attending Patriot Oaks Academy, a public school serving grades 6 to 8 in St. Johns County, his behavioral problems escalated significantly. He was frequently suspended for fighting, threatening other students, and defying teachers' authority. His grades declined as he stopped completing assignments and attending classes regularly. He began using marijuana and alcohol, sometimes coming to school high or hungover. He formed friendships with other troubled teens, and together they engaged in petty vandalism, shoplifting, and other delinquent behavior that brought him to the attention of school resource officers and local police. By 8th grade in the 2020-2021 school year, Aidan had developed a reputation as a troublemaker, the kind of kid that parents warned their children to stay away from, the kind of kid teachers dreaded having in their classrooms. What most people in Aidan's life didn't know during this period was that his interests were becoming increasingly dark and violent. On his phone and laptop, Aidan spent hours watching violent videos, street fights, torture footage from foreign conflicts, videos of animals being killed, graphic content that depicted human suffering and death. He followed social media accounts that glorified violence and serial killers. He researched infamous murderers like Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, and the Columbine shooters, reading about their crimes in detail and saving photos and information about their victims. And most disturbingly, Aidan began fantasizing about committing violence himself, wondering what it would feel like to hurt someone, to have complete power over another person, to take a life and see the moment when someone transitions from living to dead. Tristan Bailey was born on January 18, 2008, in Jacksonville, Florida, to Stacy and Forrest Bailey, a loving couple who already had 4 children and welcomed Tristan as their youngest. The Bailey family lived in the Durbin Crossing community of St. John's, an upscale planned development with amenities like pools, playgrounds, and walking trails that made it popular with families. Forrest Bailey worked in the medical field, and Stacy was a dedicated stay-at-home mother who was deeply involved in her children's lives, volunteering at their schools and attending every sporting event and activity. The Bailey family was well known and well liked in their community, active in their church, and generous with their time and resources to help others. Tristan was a bright, energetic girl who excelled in school and was passionate about cheerleading. She was a member of the Infinity All-Stars competitive cheer team, practicing multiple times per week and competing in regional and national competitions. Her teammates and coaches described Tristan as dedicated, hard-working, and always positive. The kind of athlete who encouraged others and maintained team spirit, even when routines didn't go perfectly. Tristan was also popular at Patriot Oaks Academy, where she was finishing 7th grade in spring 2021. She had a large friend group, was active on social media like most teens her age, and was looking forward to summer vacation and starting 8th grade in the fall. Tristan knew Aidan Fucci casually through school. They weren't friends, but they ran in overlapping social circles and would occasionally interact at school or at parties that teens in the area would organize. By all accounts, Tristan was wary of Aidan, aware of his reputation as aggressive and unpredictable, and she generally avoided being alone with him. But on the night of May the 9th, 2021, circumstances would bring Tristan and Aidan together in a way that would end with Tristan's brutal murder and Aidan's arrest for one of the most shocking crimes in St. Johns County history. Sunday, May 9th, 2021, was Mother's Day, a day when families across America were preparing to celebrate the mothers in their lives with cards, flowers, breakfast in bed, and quality time together. The Bailey family had plans to spend the day together honoring Stacey Bailey, cooking a special meal and relaxing at home. But as Sunday morning dawned, Stacey realized with growing alarm that Tristan was not in her bedroom where she should have been sleeping. Tristan's bed was empty, her phone was gone, and there was no note or message explaining where she might be. This was completely out of character for Tristan, who was responsible about checking in with her parents and would never simply disappear without telling them where she was going. Stacey immediately began calling and texting Tristan's phone, but the calls went straight to voicemail and the texts remained undelivered, suggesting Tristan's phone was either turned off or dead. Stacey contacted Tristan's friends, asking if anyone knew where Tristan might be, or if she had mentioned plans to go somewhere. Several friends told Stacey that Tristan had been at a party the previous night in the Durbin Crossing neighborhood, a gathering of about 20 teens at a house whose parents were away for the weekend. Friends said Tristan had been at the party until around 1 a.m. on Sunday morning, and several people had seen her leave the party on foot, saying she was walking home since she lived just a few streets away within the same neighborhood. At 10 a.m. on Mother's Day morning, May 9th, 2021, Forrest and Stacey Bailey called 911 to report their 13-year-old daughter missing. They explained to the dispatcher that Tristan had not come home from a party the previous night. Her phone was off or dead, and she had never failed to come home or check in before. The St. Johns County Sheriff's Office immediately dispatched deputies to the Bailey home to take a missing persons report and begin searching for Tristan. Deputy Samuel Johnson arrived at the Bailey residence within minutes and began gathering information. A description of what Tristan had been wearing: a white cheerleading t-shirt from her team, ripped denim shorts and white sneakers, the location of the party she had attended, the route she would have walked home, and names of friends who might know something about her disappearance. By 11 a.m., multiple deputies and volunteers from the community had mobilized to search for Tristan. The Durbin Crossing neighborhood where the Baileys lived was a maze of suburban streets with houses, retention ponds, wooded areas, and walking trails. Plenty of places where something could have happened to a young girl walking alone in the early morning hours. Parents in the neighborhood joined the search, walking the streets calling Tristan's name, checking backyards and common areas, and posting on social media asking anyone with information to contact authorities immediately. The mood was initially hopeful. Most people assumed Tristan had perhaps gotten turned around in the dark and ended up at a friend's house where she had fallen asleep, or that her phone had died and she simply couldn't call home to let her parents know where she was. But as the hours passed with no sign of Tristan, hope began to turn to fear. At approximately 6 p.m. on Sunday evening, May 9th, 2021, a neighbor named Courtney Paget was walking along a trail behind homes in the Durbin Crossing community when she spotted what appeared to be a person lying motionless in the woods, approximately 20 feet off the path. Courtney moved closer to investigate and realized with horror that it was a young girl's body lying face down in the dirt and leaves. Courtney immediately called 911, and within minutes deputies and emergency medical personnel descended on the location. At 6:18 p.m., Tristan Bailey was pronounced dead at the scene by paramedics, her body cold and showing signs of having been deceased for many hours. The scene that first responders encountered was one of unspeakable violence. Tristan's body showed obvious signs of a brutal attack. Her white cheerleading shirt was soaked with blood. Her arms and hands showed defensive wounds indicating she had fought desperately for her life. and there were numerous visible stab wounds on her exposed skin. Crime scene investigators carefully documented the scene, photographing Tristan's body and the surrounding area, looking for evidence that might identify who had committed this horrific murder. They found the tip of a knife blade that had apparently broken off during the attack, shoe prints in the soft ground around the body, and drag marks suggesting Tristan had been attacked elsewhere, and her body moved to this location among the trees and undergrowth. While crime scene investigators processed the murder scene, Sheriff Robert Hardwick held a press conference informing the community that Tristan Bailey had been found deceased and that her death was being investigated as a homicide. The announcement sent shockwaves through St. Johns County and the broader Jacksonville area. How could a 13-year-old cheerleader be murdered in a safe suburban neighborhood while walking home from a party? Who would commit such violence against a young girl? Were other children in the community at risk from a predator? Parents across the area locked their doors, brought their children inside, and anxiously awaited updates from law enforcement about whether a suspect had been identified. The investigation into Tristan's murder moved with extraordinary speed, driven by the urgency of identifying a killer who might strike again, and by the extensive evidence that Aiden Fucci had unwittingly left behind. Within hours of discovering Tristan's body, detectives had identified Aiden as a person of interest based on several factors. First, friends who had been at the party told investigators that Aiden Fucci had been there, and several people had seen Aiden and Tristan talking at various points during the evening. Second, Snapchat videos posted by Aiden himself showed him walking through the Durbin Crossing neighborhood in the early morning hours of May 9th. Around the same time Tristan would have been walking home. Third, a home security camera on a residence along the route Tristan would have walked captured footage of two people walking together around 1:45 a.m. One clearly identifiable as Tristan based on her distinctive white cheerleading shirt, and the other appearing to be a teenage male of similar height and build to Aiden. At approximately 10 hours p.m. on Sunday night, May 9th, less than 4 hours after Tristan's body was discovered, St. Johns County Sheriff's detectives arrived at the Fucci home to speak with Aiden about his interactions with Tristan at the party and his movements in the early morning hours. Detective Jason Howard and Detective Rudy Salas conducted the initial interview with Aiden at his home with his mother Crystal present. Aiden initially claimed he had been at the party, but had left around midnight and gone straight home, and that he hadn't seen Tristan leave the party and hadn't walked with her. But when detectives showed Aiden the security camera footage showing two people walking together, one clearly Tristan, Aiden changed his story, admitting that yes, he had walked with Tristan for a short distance, but they had split up after a few minutes, and he had continued walking around the neighborhood by himself before eventually going home. Detectives asked Aiden if he would be willing to come to the Sheriff's Operations Center to provide a more detailed statement and potentially help investigators by looking at security camera footage from around the neighborhood to establish a timeline of Tristan's movements. Aiden agreed, and at approximately 11:30 p.m. on Sunday night, Aiden and his mother arrived at the Sheriff's Operations Center, where detectives conducted a formal recorded interview. The interview, which would later be played in its entirety at trial, showed Aiden as nervous but attempting to appear cooperative and helpful. He repeated his claim that he had walked with Tristan briefly, but they had split up, that he hadn't seen where she went after they separated, and that he had no idea what might have happened to her. But Aiden's story was already falling apart under scrutiny, Detectives pointed out that the security camera footage showed the two figures walking together for much longer than a few minutes, and that Aidan's description of where they had supposedly split up didn't match the route shown in the video. More significantly, detectives noticed that Aidan was wearing different shoes than he had been wearing earlier in the day when they first spoke to him at his house. Aidan claimed his earlier shoes had gotten muddy when he was walking around the neighborhood at night, so he had changed into clean shoes. Detectives asked where those muddy shoes were, and Aidan said he had washed them and they were drying at home. This immediately raised red flags. Why would someone wash muddy shoes in the middle of the night unless they were trying to destroy evidence? At approximately 2:30 a.m. on Monday morning, May 10th, now Mother's Day was over and a new day had begun, detectives informed Aidan that he was being detained as a suspect in Tristan Bailey's murder and formally arrested him. Aidan appeared shocked, repeatedly asking, "What? Why? I didn't do anything." His mother Crystal became hysterical, crying and insisting there must be a mistake, that her son couldn't possibly have hurt anyone. But as detectives executed search warrants on the Fucci home and Aidan's person, the evidence of his guilt became overwhelming. In Aidan's bedroom, investigators found a pair of white Nike shoes with bloodstains visible on the soles and sides, along with jeans that had been hastily washed but still showed traces of blood. In the bathroom, investigators found blood evidence in the sink and shower drain, where Aidan had attempted to wash away Tristan's blood from his body. Most damningly, the knife that investigators believed had been used to murder Tristan was found in a pond near the Fucci home, a Buck brand folding knife with a broken tip that matched the tip found at the crime scene, and with Tristan's blood still visible on the blade despite Aidan's attempts to clean it. The medical examiner's autopsy of Tristan Bailey revealed the full horror of what Aidan Fucci had done to her. Dr. Predrag Bulik, the chief medical examiner for the 7th District of Florida, performed the autopsy and would later provide testimony that shocked even experienced homicide detectives and prosecutors. Tristan had been stabbed 114 times, an almost incomprehensible number of stab wounds inflicted during what must have been a prolonged frenzied attack. The wounds covered her head, neck, shoulders, arms, hands, torso, and legs. At least 49 of the stab wounds were defensive wounds on Tristan's arms and hands, indicating she had desperately tried to fight off her attacker and protect herself by raising her arms to block the knife. Some wounds penetrated deep into Tristan's body, puncturing her lungs, liver, and other vital organs. The cause of death was determined to be sharp force trauma, with multiple lethal injuries. Essentially, Tristan had died from blood loss and organ damage from being stabbed so many times that her body simply couldn't survive the trauma. Dr. Bulik testified that the extensive nature of the injuries suggested the attack had lasted several minutes, not seconds, meaning Tristan had endured prolonged terror and pain before finally succumbing to her wounds. The defensive wounds showed that Tristan had fought for her life until the very end, trying to grab the knife, trying to push her attacker away, trying desperately to survive. The medical examiner also noted that some of the stab wounds appeared to have been inflicted after Tristan was already dead or dying, suggesting the attacker had continued stabbing even after Tristan could no longer fight back, an indication of extreme rage or a desire to ensure she was dead. As investigators built their case against Aidan Fucci in the days and weeks following his arrest, the evidence continued to mount. Forensic analysis confirmed that Tristan's blood was on Aidan's shoes, jeans, and body, and that Aidan's DNA was found under Tristan's fingernails, where she had scratched at him while trying to defend herself. Security camera footage from multiple homes in the neighborhood showed Aidan and Tristan walking together, then showed Aidan walking back alone approximately 40 minutes later, a timeline that matched the medical examiner's estimate of when Tristan had died. Cell phone data placed both Aidan's phone and Tristan's phone in the area where her body was found during the time frame of the murder. And perhaps most damning, Aidan's own. Social media posts and text messages provided evidence of his state of mind before and after the murder. On Saturday, May the 8th, the day before he murdered Tristan, Aidan had sent a Snapchat message to a friend saying, "Wouldn't it be funny if someone died tonight?" The friend had replied, "What?" And Aidan had responded, "Nothing, just random thought." Hours after Tristan's murder, while search parties were combing the neighborhood looking for her, Aidan posted a Snapchat selfie from the back of a police cruiser when he was being taken to the Sheriff's Operations Center for questioning. In the selfie, Aidan was making a peace sign with his fingers and smirking, with the caption, "Has anybody seen Tristan lately?" The post was visible to all his Snapchat friends and was screenshot by several people before Aidan deleted it, and it would later be used by prosecutors as evidence of Aidan's callous indifference to Tristan's death and his perception that he would get away with murder. Even more disturbing were recorded phone calls that Aidan made from jail in the days and weeks following his arrest. Conversations with his mother, with friends who had been approved to receive calls from him, and even with his grandmother, were recorded as is standard procedure for all inmate calls. In these calls, Aidan could be heard laughing about the charges against him, speculating about his legal case, and expressing confidence that he would beat this because prosecutors couldn't prove he had intended to kill Tristan. In one particularly chilling call to his mother, Aidan said, "I'm probably looking at like 5 years in juvie, maybe less if my lawyer's good. I'll get out when I'm like 19 or 20, and this'll all be sealed, and I can just move on with my life." His mother, apparently believing this assessment, tried to reassure Aidan that everything would work out and he would be home soon. What Aidan fundamentally misunderstood, what his mother and family apparently also didn't understand, was that Florida law has some of the harshest juvenile sentencing provisions in the country, particularly for first-degree murder. Under Florida Statute 985.565, juveniles as young as 14 can be prosecuted as adults for certain serious felonies, including first-degree murder, and if convicted, they face the same sentencing range as adult defendants. The only limitation is that juveniles cannot receive the death penalty or automatic life without parole. Instead, they must receive sentences that allow for judicial review after a certain period, typically 25 years, to determine if rehabilitation has occurred and release might be appropriate. But this still means that a 14-year-old convicted of first-degree murder in Florida can be sentenced to life in prison with no release until at least age 39, and potentially never if multiple judicial reviews determine they remain dangerous. State Attorney R.J. Laritza announced on May 27, 2021, that his office would be charging Aidan Fucci as an adult with first-degree premeditated murder in the death of Tristan Bailey. At a press conference, Laritza explained the decision. The decision to charge a juvenile as an adult is never made lightly, but in this case, the facts speak for themselves. This was not an impulsive act. This was not a sudden fight that got out of control. This was a calculated, cold-blooded murder. Aidan Fucci lured Tristan Bailey to an isolated area and stabbed her 114 times, continuing to stab her even as she fought for her life and even after she was no longer able to defend herself. The community is horrified, Tristan's family is devastated, and justice requires that Aiden Fucci be held accountable as an adult for this adult crime. The announcement that Aiden would be charged as an adult meant he would be tried in regular criminal court rather than juvenile court, and if convicted, he would face adult sentencing, including the possibility of life in prison. Aiden's defense attorneys from the Public Defender's Office immediately filed motions challenging the decision to charge him as an adult, arguing that Aiden was only 14 years old, that his brain was still developing, and he lacked the maturity and judgment to fully understand the consequences of his actions, and that sentencing a 14-year-old to life in prison would be cruel and unusual punishment. But Judge R. Lee Smith denied these motions after extensive hearings, ruling that the nature of the crime and the evidence of premeditation justified adult prosecution. The case proceeded slowly through pretrial proceedings over the next year and a half, as defense attorneys filed numerous motions and both sides prepared for what everyone expected would be a lengthy trial. But on February 6, 2023, in a stunning development, Aiden Fucci changed his plea from not guilty to guilty, admitting to first-degree murder and accepting responsibility for killing Tristan Bailey. The plea change came during what was supposed to be a routine pre-trial hearing, and it caught court observers and even prosecutors somewhat by surprise since Aiden had maintained his innocence for nearly 2 years. According to his defense attorneys, Aiden had finally come to terms with the overwhelming evidence against him and had accepted their advice that pleading guilty would give him the best chance at a lenient sentence, possibly life with the possibility of release after 25 years, rather than life without any possibility of release ever. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for March 24, 2023, and it would be one of the most emotionally charged court proceedings in St. Johns County history. The hearing took place at the St. Johns County Courthouse, with Judge R. Lee Smith presiding, State Attorney R.J. Larissa, and his team presenting the state's case for the harshest possible sentence, and public defenders Rosemary Peoples and Stanley Bosch arguing for mercy and a sentence that would give Aiden at least some possibility of eventual release. The courtroom was packed with Tristan Bailey's family, friends, cheerleading teammates, and community members who wanted to see justice done for the 13-year-old girl whose life had been so violently taken. The hearing began with victim impact statements from Tristan's family, and the testimony was heartbreaking. Stacey Bailey, Tristan's mother, stood at the podium and spoke directly to the judge about the daughter she had lost. Fighting through tears, Stacey described Tristan as the light of our lives, a girl who brought joy to everyone she met. She was kind, compassionate, hard-working, and full of dreams for her future. She wanted to be a doctor. She wanted to help people. She had so much life ahead of her. Stacey described the moment she learned Tristan's body had been found on Mother's Day. That will haunt me for the rest of my life. The worst day of any mother's life happened on the day we're supposed to celebrate mothers. My daughter was taken from me in the most brutal, violent way imaginable. She was stabbed 114 times. She fought for her life. She was scared and in pain, and I couldn't protect her. No parent should ever have to endure what we've endured. Forrest Bailey, Tristan's father, also delivered a victim impact statement describing his daughter as his baby girl and expressing rage at Aiden Fucci for what he had done. "You didn't just kill our daughter," Forrest said, looking directly at Aiden, who sat at the defense table, looking down at his hands. "You tortured her. You stabbed her 114 times. She fought you with everything she had, and you kept stabbing her. Even after she couldn't fight anymore, you kept stabbing her. You're a monster. You're evil. and you deserve to spend the rest of your life in prison paying for what you did. Several of Tristan's siblings also spoke, describing the pain of losing their baby sister and the ways their lives had been forever changed by her murder. After the victim impact statements concluded, prosecutors presented their sentencing recommendation. Assistant State Attorney Jason Lewis argued that Aiden deserved life in prison based on the brutality and premeditation of the crime, the age and vulnerability of the victim, and Aiden's complete lack of remorse. Lewis walked the judge through the evidence, the Snapchat messages showing Aiden's state of mind before the murder, the security camera footage showing him walking with Tristan and returning alone, the 114 stab wounds that demonstrated sustained violence and intent to kill, the defensive wounds showing Tristan had fought for her life, Aiden's attempts to cover up the crime by washing his clothes and disposing of the knife, and his disturbing behavior after the murder, including the selfie posted to Snapchat and his jailhouse phone calls treating his situation as a minor inconvenience rather than the consequence of murdering someone. Your Honor, Lewis said, Aiden Fucci made a choice on May 9th, 2021. He chose to lure a 13-year-old girl to an isolated location. He chose to attack her with a knife. He chose to stab her 114 times, continuing the attack even as she begged for her life and fought desperately to survive. Those were choices, Your Honor. Not impulsive reactions, not accidents. Deliberate choices made by someone who wanted to know what it felt like to kill another human being. And after making those choices, Aiden has shown absolutely no remorse. He posted joking social media posts. He bragged to friends. He told his mother he'd be out of jail in 5 years. He has never apologized to Tristan's family. He has never taken responsibility for the pain and suffering he caused. The only appropriate sentence is life in prison. The defense attorneys then presented their case for a more lenient sentence. Public defender Rosemary Peoples argued that while Aiden's crime was horrific, he was still only 14 years old at the time, a child whose brain was not fully developed and who lacked the capacity for mature judgment that adults possess. Peoples presented testimony from psychologists who had evaluated Aiden, who testified that he suffered from conduct disorder, had experienced trauma in his childhood due to his father's absence and his mother's struggles with substance abuse, and that with intensive psychiatric treatment over many years, there was potential for rehabilitation. Peoples argued that sentencing Aiden to life without the realistic possibility of release would be giving up on a child, abandoning hope that he could change and eventually become a productive member of society. Your Honor, Peoples said, what Aiden did was terrible. There's no denying that. But he was 14 years old. 14. Neuroscience tells us that adolescent brains are not fully developed, particularly in areas governing impulse control and understanding consequences. Aiden made a catastrophic mistake, a choice that ended one life and destroyed countless others, including his own. But he's still a human being, still someone with potential for change and growth. We're not asking you to excuse what he did. We're asking you to remember that he was a child when he did it, and that even children who commit terrible crimes retain the capacity to mature, to develop empathy, to become different people than they were at 14. Life with the possibility of review after 25 years would ensure Aiden spends decades in prison, paying for his crime, while preserving some hope that if he genuinely changes, if he develops into a different person who feels remorse and understands the magnitude of what he did, he might someday have a chance at release. Judge R. Lee Smith then asked Aiden if he wished to make a statement before sentence was imposed. This was Aiden's opportunity to apologize, to express remorse, to show the Bailey family and the court that he understood the gravity of what he had done. Aidan stood at the podium, and for a long moment, he stood silent, appearing to struggle with what to say. Finally, he spoke. "I'm sorry for what I did. I know I took Tristan away from her family, and I'm sorry about that. I wish I could take it back, but I can't." The apology was brief, emotionless, and rang hollow to everyone in the courtroom who had watched Aidan's behavior over the previous 2 years. There was no emotion in his voice, no tears, no indication of genuine remorse, just words that his attorneys had probably told him he needed to say. Judge Smith then delivered his ruling, a lengthy statement that addressed both the horrific nature of the crime and the complex issues surrounding sentencing a juvenile offender. "Mr. Fucci," Judge Smith began, "I have presided over this court for many years and have sentenced hundreds of defendants for serious crimes. But this case has been among the most disturbing and difficult I have ever encountered. You were 14 years old when you committed this crime, and Florida law requires me to take your age into account when determining an appropriate sentence. The law recognizes that children are different from adults, that their brains are still developing, that they are more capable of change and rehabilitation. These are important principles that guide our justice system's approach to juvenile offenders." Judge Smith continued, "But the law also requires me to consider the nature and circumstances of your crime, the harm you caused, the need to protect society, and your likelihood of rehabilitation. And when I consider those factors in your case, I am forced to conclude that you present an exceptional danger. You didn't kill Tristan Bailey in a moment of passion or rage. You lured her to an isolated location with apparent premeditation. You stabbed her 114 times, not once, not twice, but 114 times. You continued stabbing her as she fought for her life, as she begged you to stop, even after she no longer had the strength to defend herself. The medical examiner testified that this attack lasted several minutes, an eternity for poor Tristan, as she suffered unimaginable pain and terror." Judge Smith's voice became firmer as he continued, "And after committing this horrific murder, you showed absolutely no remorse. You posted a joking selfie on social media. You told friends you thought this was funny. You expressed confidence that you would serve maybe 5 years and then be released to get on with your life. Even now, after pleading guilty, after hearing the pain you caused Tristan's family, your apology seemed rehearsed and insincere. I see no genuine remorse. I see no empathy. I see no indication that you truly understand the magnitude of what you did or the permanent, irreversible harm you caused." Judge Smith paused, looked directly at Aidan, and pronounced sentence. "Therefore, it is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Tristan Bailey. Under Florida law, you will be eligible for a judicial review after 25 years to determine if you have been rehabilitated and if release might be appropriate. That review will occur when you are 39 years old, assuming you survived that long in prison. But I will tell you frankly, Mr. Fucci, that based on the evidence I have seen of your character, your complete lack of remorse, and the brutality of your crime, I believe it is highly unlikely you will ever be deemed suitable for release. You will almost certainly spend the rest of your natural life in prison. That is what justice requires for what you did to Tristan Bailey." As Judge Smith finished pronouncing sentence, Aidan's face showed genuine shock for the first time since his arrest. The cocky smirk that had characterized his demeanor throughout the proceedings vanished, replaced by a look of disbelief. His mouth dropped open slightly, his eyes widened, and he turned to his attorneys as if seeking confirmation that what he had just heard was real. Life in prison, not 5 years in juvenile detention, not release at age 19 or 20, life in prison with no realistic hope of ever being free. The full weight of his actions had finally, belatedly, crashed down on Aiden Fucci, and the reality that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars was clearly not what he had expected. Crystal Smith, Aiden's mother, who had been sitting in the courtroom throughout the hearing, burst into tears and had to be helped from the courtroom by family members. Aiden was led away by bailiffs, his legs appearing unsteady, his confident swagger completely gone. As he exited the courtroom, he glanced back once at his mother, and for perhaps the first time in the 2 years since he had murdered Tristan Bailey, Aiden Fucci appeared to understand that his life as he had known it was over, that he had destroyed not just Tristan's life and her family's happiness, but his own future as well. The Bailey family released a statement after the sentencing, expressing gratitude that justice had been served, but noting that no sentence could bring Tristan back or heal the wounds her murder had caused. Today, Judge Smith ensured that Aiden Fucci will never have the opportunity to hurt another person the way he hurt our Tristan, the statement read. We are grateful for that, but we want everyone to understand that this is not closure for us. We will live with the horror of what happened to our daughter for the rest of our lives. Every holiday, every birthday, every milestone that Tristan should have experienced but never will, those are wounds that never fully heal. We hope that as Aiden spends the rest of his life in prison, he will finally develop the capacity to feel remorse for what he did. We hope he will spend his days thinking about Tristan, about the pain she endured, about the life he stole from her. And we hope other young people who might be tempted to commit violence will see what happened to Aiden and understand that actions have consequences that can destroy not just other people's lives, but your own as well. As of December 2025, Aiden Fucci remains incarcerated in the Florida Department of Corrections, currently housed at a facility that handles youthful offenders. He turned 19 years old in November 2025 and will soon be transferred to an adult maximum security prison where he will spend the remainder of his life unless the judicial review that will occur in 2046 determines he has been sufficiently rehabilitated to warrant release, an outcome that legal experts consider extremely unlikely given the nature of his crime and his documented lack of remorse. Tristan Bailey would have turned 17 years old in January 2025, would have been a high school junior, would have been preparing for college, would have had her whole life ahead of her. Instead, her life ended at 13 in the woods behind her neighborhood, murdered by a boy who wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. The case of Aiden Fucci serves as a stark reminder that evil does not have an age requirement, that even 14-year-olds are capable of calculated brutal violence, and that the justice system must balance the recognition that children are different from adults with the need to protect society from dangerous individuals regardless of their age. It also serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of violent media, desensitization to violence through internet content, and the warning signs that troubled teenagers display long before they commit irreversible acts. Aiden Fucci thought he would serve 5 years in juvenile detention and then return to his life. Instead, he will die in prison, a consequence he clearly never imagined when he decided to murder Tristan Bailey on Mother's Day 2021. That is justice, but it is justice that came too late to save an innocent 13-year-old girl whose life was stolen by someone she thought she could trust.